They found her hair white at dawn, so white it looked like a wreath of ash crowning a ruined queen. Picture that morning, October 16th, 1793. Damp light through a barred window. Two guards with keys. The face they had once seen in portraits, powdered, composed, almost theatrical, was gone. In its place, a woman hollowed out by deliberate violence. This wasn't a single moment of fear. It was a slow, engineered death. For 76 days, they unmade her. Not with a single blow, but with small, surgical cruelties. Food measured like medicine, sleep ruptured by sudden inspections, dignity removed as a performance for the guards. They stripped her of everything, clothes, jewelry, wig, until she was only a body to be studied and scorned. She was taken from her children's prison under the black, narrow stairs of the courthouse to a cell called La Conciergerie. 11 feet by 9. No windows, one straw mattress alive with lice, a single bucket for every need. Two guards posted inside, always. Imagine being forced to live while watched like an exhibit. You cannot bathe without men watching. You cannot change without men watching. You cannot even use the bucket privately. A diary of humiliation. The goal was clear. This was psychological warfare dressed as custody. Revolutionary testimony, documents unsealed decades later, describe guards who jeered, who forced her to undress, made comments about her body. They brought her children's clothes and made her smell them, a slow ritual of loss. They controlled what she ate, giving enough to survive but never enough to think. They woke her at random hours. They let sickness grow. By day 50, the body began to fail. Untreated uterine hemorrhaging left her weak, anemic, bleeding into a cell with no doctor, no relief. When physicians pleaded for care, prosecutors shrugged. "Let her bleed," one is recorded as saying. "It will make her easier to judge." And so the countdown continued. Scratch marks on stone, 76 ticks toward an appointment the state had scheduled not simply to kill, but to display a total destruction of rank and personhood. By October 14th, 1793, her body was almost gone, but they still needed to finish breaking her mind. That morning, guards dragged Marie Antoinette, thin, pale, shaking, into the Revolutionary Tribunal. She hadn't seen daylight in weeks. Her vision blurred from blood loss. Yet as she entered that courtroom, filled with shouting men, the crowd didn't see a human being. They saw the revolution's revenge given shape. The trial began at 8 in the morning and didn't end for 16 hours. She had no lawyer for most of it. No witnesses allowed to defend her. No rest. No food. The verdict, historians later discovered, had been written 2 days earlier. Everything that followed was theater, a carefully staged ritual meant to justify a public death. But even a performance needs a climax. And what they did next still defies imagination. Prosecutor Antoine Fouquier-Tinville brought in a witness. A child. Her son, Louis Charles. 8 years old. He'd been kept alone for months, beaten and starved until he signed a confession claiming that his mother, had sexually abused him. When the accusation was read aloud, the courtroom fell into silence. Even the tricoteuses, the women who knitted through executions, stopped knitting. Marie Antoinette, who had remained silent through hours of interrogation, finally stood. Her voice was quiet, almost broken, but it cut through the room like a bell. "If I have not replied," she said, "it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge laid against a mother. I appeal to all mothers here. Can such a crime be possible?" The crowd shifted. People wept. Even the hard-faced revolutionaries looked away. For a single moment, she was not a symbol. She was a mother defending the last piece of herself. And that terrified the prosecutor. He called a recess, then reconvened the court at midnight, when the sympathetic audience had gone home. New jurors arrived, drunk from revolutionary clubs. At 4 in the morning, after 20 hours of cruelty disguised as justice, the predetermined verdict was read aloud. Guilty. Sentence, death by guillotine. Execution, set for noon that same day. 8 hours to live. And she made one final request, a request that turned her death into one of the most degrading public spectacles in French history. When Marie Antoinette heard her sentence, She did not scream or plead. She simply asked to be taken to the scaffold in a closed carriage. That single request, for a shred of privacy, a last fragment of dignity, sealed her fate. To the revolutionaries, it was blasphemy. Nobles rode in carriages. Criminals rode in den carts. So they made their point brutally clear. At 11 a.m., October 16, 1793, the executioner Charles-Henri Sanson entered her cell. In front of laughing guards, he hacked off her hair with iron scissors, jagged, humiliating, theatrical. The first act of the show. Then came the cart. Not a carriage, not even clean wood. The same wagon used to haul manure through the Paris streets. The smell of waste still clung to the straw. The guards tied her hands behind her back so tightly that the ropes cut into her skin. She could not balance. Every cobblestone jolt made her lurch forward, fighting not to fall face first into the filth. The route from La Conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution should have taken 15 minutes. They made it last 72, a slow parade of revenge. The cart rolled through packed streets, past the Tuileries Palace, once her home. The driver stopped at every intersection, letting the mob get a good look. People screamed insults. They threw vegetables and human waste. Street performers mocked her, dressed in fake gowns and powdered wigs, begging for mercy in exaggerated voices while the crowd roared with laughter. The artist Jacques-Louis David sat in a cafe window and sketched her as she passed. That sketch survives. The thin mouth, the hollow eyes, the uneven white hair. This wasn't defiance or fear. It was the emptiness of someone who had already died inside, waiting for her body to catch up. Madame de Staël wrote later, "I understood for the first time that people could enjoy cruelty." 30,000 Parisians lined that route, not to mourn, not even to judge, but to consume her suffering. When the cart finally reached the square, 50,000 citizens were waiting. The guillotine towered above them, 20 feet high, painted bright red. And as she stepped down from the cart, her legs trembling, she stumbled onto the executioner's foot. Her final words were a whisper. "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." The crowd roared as the executioner led her up the steps. 50,000 people pressed shoulder to shoulder, craning to see. The sun burned against the red paint of the scaffold, the blade gleaming like a promise. But that promise of a swift and merciful death was a lie. Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin had claimed that his invention would end pain forever. Instantaneous. Humane. But what happened on that platform proved it was never about mercy, it was about spectacle. Decades later, in 1847, the grandson of executioner Charles-Henri Sanson published his family's memoirs. And in those pages, he revealed something France had buried for half a century. The blade used on Marie Antoinette had been deliberately dulled. The Revolutionary Committee, he wrote, ordered his grandfather not to sharpen it before special executions to create a more dramatic effect. The suffering of the condemned was part of the show. Witnesses described hearing not one, but two impacts. The blade didn't slice cleanly. It struck, hesitated, struck again. One observer, Gracchus Babeuf, wrote privately, "I saw the blade rise and fall twice." The crowd cheered louder the second time. Imagine that. Your head locked in the wooden frame. You hear the release, the thud, but you're still conscious. For 1 or 2 eternal seconds, you feel pressure, heat, confusion. You are alive inside a dying body, waiting for the second blow. When it was over, Sanson lifted her severed head by the hair, as protocol demanded, and turned it toward the crowd. But her white hair, brittle and blood-slick, slipped through his fingers. The head fell back into the basket with a hollow, wet sound that witnesses said was louder than the cheering. They didn't gasp. They applauded. Gunfire cracked in celebration. Vendors sold prints of the scene before her body had even cooled. Her corpse was dumped into an unmarked mass grave, a pit with 8 other bodies covered in lime and dirt. No cross, no ceremony, no name. The revolutionaries hadn't just killed a queen. They had erased a human being. Marie Antoinette's execution was meant to end an era. Instead, it opened the gates to something far worse. Her death didn't stop the revolution. It fed it. Within the next 10 months, the guillotine would claim 16,594 more lives. Not soldiers, not spies, but ordinary citizens. Bakers, teachers, merchants, anyone accused of being an enemy of the people. Justice had mutated into performance. The crowd wanted more blood, and the state learned how to give it to them. That's the real legacy of October 16th, 1793. Her death wasn't justice. It was the blueprint for terror. The revolutionaries had promised enlightenment, reason over barbarity. Instead, they reinvented barbarity with cleaner edges and scientific precision. The guillotine became an assembly line for human destruction. Fast, efficient, empoisonnée. And Marie Antoinette was its first great spectacle, a public demonstration that even queens could be humiliated, dissected, and erased. They called it equality, but it was revenge wearing a mask of progress. The irony is painful. The woman history remembers as a monster was, in truth, one of its earliest victims of political propaganda. Let them eat cake. She never said it. The phrase appeared decades after her death, a fabrication to justify the violence that had already been done, a story crafted to make her execution feel righteous. And yet that lie worked. For more than 2 centuries, her name has stood for vanity and indifference, not suffering and endurance. That's the power of erasure. When humiliation becomes entertainment, when empathy dies, when we let ideology decide who counts as human, this is what follows. Because the guillotine didn't die with the revolution. It just changed shape. You can find its shadow in every regime, every purge, every system that decides some people deserve dignity and others don't. So here's my question to you, and I want you to answer it honestly. Was Marie Antoinette a villain who deserved her fate, or a scapegoat sacrificed to keep a revolution alive? And more importantly, where does justice end and revenge begin? Think carefully, because history has a habit of repeating itself.